And we are live. Brandon Lejeune, welcome in.
Hey, appreciate you having me on, Sonny.
So yes, I'm excited about this episode. I'm actually for Devy. I don't think I've ever had any kind of Devy content.
Yeah, well, I've been kind of tagging you to get on the show with you. You were actually one of the first podcasts that I listened to, actually, because you're a solo guy like me. I have a podcast too that do a lot of solo episodes. In fact, I'm on my 100th episode this week, which is pretty cool. But I remember listening to you and a long time ago. Started out my podcast too. Of course, it's all about Devy, but started out with Dynasty and then moved to Devy, and then I'm hook, line, and sinker. So I appreciate you having me on. Especially you guys who are focused. Yeah,
on the 100th episode, I just had mine. I didn't even know it was coming either. So congrats. It's awesome.
Yeah, and a lot of guys, on my Slack chat are like, "What are you doing for your 100th?" And I said, "I'm just going to do a normal episode." So I'm kind of boring that way. But hey, I appreciate you having me on. I love talking Devy, especially for your listeners out there that maybe have been thinking about getting into a Devy league. It's just a lot of fun, and I'm excited to talk about the 2022 and 2023 classes coming up.
Yeah, me too. And I've had you on before, so if my listeners are probably familiar with you, but this is going to be all Devy, all Brandon's. Like, actually, before we get into it, there is a lot to talk about, but I want you to take a minute and tell everybody about what you're doing over there at the dashboard, your Devy dashboard and stuff, because I'm telling you, that is one of the busiest Slack channels I've ever seen. There's always content, just people talking, like analyzing. I can't even keep up, honestly. Like I only have my one Devy team, and I'm like, oh yeah, let me go see what they're talking about, and it just keeps going, and I'm like, these guys are obsessed because you have all the what is it, Canton to
Campus to Canton,
right? So
yeah,
that's the kind of things I don't mess with that yet, but I find it all fascinating. Yeah. I like to just keep my kind of finger plugged in on all of the different young players coming up. So that's exciting to me that I'm going to be kind of picking your brain on all. And I have, as I told you right before this, I actually have my Devy draft starting this morning. Started this morning, and I didn't even know it was going to be starting this morning. So I'm not going to be able to actually get to my pick probably, but I will use a little selfish time to pick your brain about a few of these incoming freshman players that are coming in. Yeah, but take a minute to talk about the dashboard real quick before we get into it. What you're doing?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sonny. I created my dashboard. It's really it's kind of like a dual resource, right? I have a big database on a Notion program, and I like to. What's great about it, it's just I have ranks on there broken down by classes, but it's a research center. So if you select a player, I've got over 600 Devy players in it right now. And it's a research center. So if you click on a name, it's going to take you to all the links on the internet, so you don't have to go to Google and do all these searches. But more importantly than that, it's the Slack chat, right? That is probably my favorite part of what I do. I know there's a lot of people who listen to my podcast who aren't on Twitter. Twitter's not for everybody. So I wanted to create more of a more intimate community of people being able to express themselves without, the fear of getting on Twitter and maybe being on the mass, social media platform. So it's great. We talk about Devy values, trade offers, and I post scouting films, and we talk about players and their skill sets and stuff. So it's just a really big community of, I got over 265 guys now. 2 ladies as well, which is great. But yeah, we just talk all about Devy, and I just added dynasty ranks as well. Britt Sanders, a longtime dashboard guy, asked me to provide dynasty ranks. So I'm kind of expanding the program, and really, what's really cool, I got one last piece to this whole puzzle of putting out a really great analytics tool to scout all of your favorite metrics for these players. And I'll be actually unveiling that next week. So it's it really is just a great alternative. If you're new to Devy, I'm going to say about 80% of the people that reach out to me to join the dashboard are all new to Devy, which is great because I love expanding the game and introducing Devy to people who aren't into it. So I'm really having a great time with it. It's a fun hobby for me. And it's just I have a blast doing all the work that I do for it.
Yeah, Brandon is on the grind, guys. Seriously, check out his YouTube channel. I got Parker Washington on my Devy team the middle of last season. Just like, what's this on YouTube? What's this Parker Washington? Oh, I'm gonna have to go see if he's available. And sure enough, he was. So those are the kind of things that Brandon can do for you. He's there grinding, just throwing out videos of different. And I love your videos, by the way, because you don't do any talker. It's just like broken down to show us what we want to see. A little bit of music and the clips of the actual player playing. So I love that as well. I think it's totally underrated, and I think more people need to check out your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We have this kind of saying on the dashboard I say with my guys. It's kind of maybe one of my taglines is you have to look beyond the highlights, right? Because I think the majority of people who rank players or who think that they know players. They go to YouTube and they search, they watch 3 or 4 highlight films, and that's exactly what they are, highlight films, right? And I think they can be super misleading. So I provide a lot of game films where I'll record like an Eric Gray film. I did 3 of his films lately against Georgia, Florida. I think the other one, I'm not sure which one it was, but you're going to see all 15 or 20 of his carries, not just the 3 or 4 that went for big yardage, but where you got stuffed at the line of scrimmage and stuff. So you can really scout players for yourself, because I think there's a lot of misses in this game, because I think a lot of people get really enamored with highlight films, but there's probably equally as many plays for each of these players that don't look so good either. For sure.
That's exactly. I totally agree with that. So let's go ahead and just get into it. We got a lot to talk about. At least I have a lot of questions.
No problem.
I can keep you here for like 3 hours talking with every class. But let's go ahead and start with the 2020 class. That's the one that's coming out next, obviously. So a lot of our Dynasty listeners, being that I'm a Dynasty guy, this will be, kind of the next wave. This is what they're really going to be keen in. And for me, even though I do Devy and I do kind of look at the freshman class and the sophomore, it's not until I'm pretty sure that they're coming out of the NFL draft that I start actually really, like you said, scouting beyond the highlights. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times I'm just looking at highlights for some of these younger players. And once coming out of high school, that's pretty much all there is highlights. So then when we get into the, the full game film and stuff, I think that this year's class, I know there's some that are going to be coming out, some that have not committed or whatever, but let's just kind of assume that majority of the players that would be eligible would come out. Let's talk about this class. Maybe we start with the quarterbacks.
Are you talking about next year's class, right?
Yeah, 2022.
Yeah, 2022 class. Yeah. So, I think if you're going to compare it to this year's class, I think there's really only 2 guys right now as far as next year that we can expect to get first round draft capital, and that's Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell. Okay, Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma, Sam Howell from North Carolina. You look at mock drafts right now, and they've been pretty much the QB 1 and 2, however you like either one of those 2 players. But after that, there's a lot of mystery, and I think it's going to end up being a decent class. Malik Willis from Liberty is a guy who's recently gotten some buzz, had a really good year last year. You got a player like Matt Corral from Ole Miss and Carson Strong from Nevada. And, Keaton Slovis, who had a great freshman year, kind of took a step back last year. A lot of guys may be off him right now, but if he comes back and has a good showing this year, I think, he could certainly, his draft stock could, kind of maybe get him back up into that conversation. But you got JT Daniels from Georgia, Phil Jerkovich, from Boston College, Jayden Daniels from Arizona State. So there's a lot of guys. Everyone's kind of probably looking for, at least in our Slack chat, like who's going to be next year's Zach Wilson, right? Like who's going to be the guy that comes out from nowhere and gets early draft capital. So I think the 2022 QB class is going to be a pretty solid class.
The Corral kid, tell me about him, because I agree with you on the top 2 guys, and then I was in that same kind of mindset, like trying to figure out beyond those 2, kind of who are the other guys that kind of step in that. That was a name that I kind of saw, and when I saw his highlights, I believe I was intrigued.
Yeah, I have him at number 3 currently in my ranks right now, and I think he has all of the tangibles of the playmaking ability. He's got the rocket arm. If you watch him throw the ball down the field, Elijah Moore, he caught a ton of great passes from him. He's got mobility, I think, in the pocket. The only knock on the kid is his interceptions and the mistakes that he makes. That's, I think, if he can really come out and have a better TD to interception ratio, I think he has the ability to really do well. He lost Elijah Moore, so he's got some younger receivers he's going to have to get into the fold. But I think right now, of all of the quarterbacks, rather, Matt Corral, I think, is somebody, like I said, I got him number 3. I think he has the ability to, if he has a good season, if he can clean up the mistakes, because I think he's one of the toughest quarterbacks in all of college football. That guy has taken a beating running with the ball. He's not afraid to get, on goal lines to, get that 2-3 yard run into the end zone, and he'll scramble. He can maneuver in the pocket. It's just that he really makes bad decisions, and how the NFL is going to, look at that is I guess his biggest question mark.
Yep, that sounds good. For me, my Devy team is a 1 QB league, and I feel like depending on how you play, it's made me really, like, I just stay away from quarterbacks almost completely in Devy in terms of drafting any kind of freshman coming in terms of trying to make bets on these players because of the roster spots and everything. So it's interesting to me. I think it's one of those few positions. It's such a difference. It makes such a huge difference in terms of rules, where if it's super flex, all of a sudden collecting a lot of these guys it really makes a big difference. And I've seen some different Devy leagues where they are, and it seems like people are really collecting the quarterbacks and using a lot of roster spots, which I usually am like in support of in a super flex league with professional players. But with the college, it still kind of throws me off. And I find it interesting, and I just wanted your take on that in terms of, do you see a lot of Devy being mostly super flex, or is it still kind of, because when I joined Devy, and this was almost 5 years ago, it was still kind of standard one QB and everything. And then when I look at it that way and you see how you only need one good quarterback and I've already got 2 or 3, then it almost feels impossible to even want to spend capital in my Devy drafts on quarterbacks when I'd rather plug the running backs first and then wide receivers.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. In fact, for a lot of my supplemental drafts in my campus to Can't leagues, which are like super deep, so you're getting it. You're really only drafting the incoming freshman class and maybe a couple guys that fell through the cracks. A lot of guys are taking QBs early, and I'm going to say the majority of my Devy leagues that I'm in are all 2 QB. I'm not in very many leagues that have 1 QB, so I think the shift has changed. Even in Devy leagues, the majority of them are 2 QB leagues. But I agree with you 100%. I mean, let's face it, we only get 3 or 4 quarterbacks out of each class that really end up being on our dynasty rosters. And for me playing Devy, it's all about making it to my dynasty rosters, right? So campus to Can't leagues are a little different because you're drafting players, you want college production. So that's a little bit of a different animal. But for the guys that are in strict Devy leagues, like the one you and I were talking about pre-show, where you've got 20 people deep or whatever, and you're basically building a stockpile of players hoping that they land on your dynasty rosters. I completely agree with you. Taking quarterbacks, these early quarterbacks in drafts is extremely risky, because I'm going to say 80% of them never pan out, regardless of their 24/7 rankings and their recruiting profiles of how great they're going to be. If you go back and just look at the history of quarterbacks, a lot of them don't make it.
For sure. Well, let's talk about the most important position in all of fantasy, and also the most used up and hardest, one of those ones that it's hard to keep them for long. It's hard to maintain the running backs, but it is definitely the kind of the bread and butter of our fantasy production. And so that is actually, when I look at my Devy, I'm almost always just plugging the running backs first, because the wide receivers, I feel like, yes, they're a little easier to predict than say quarterbacks. Tight ends are impossible to predict. It seems like quarterbacks are near impossible to predict. So to me, that my strategy is just plug those running backs, those top tier running backs, the guys who are around 200 pounds, the guys who have some high, athletic abilities and things, that 4-star, 5-star rating type guys, and just always be looking for those, because I feel like that running back position is it's always going to be feeding not just the production, but the value in terms of trade value. And so that, to me, this is the position, my bread and butter in terms of Devy, that I'm just always, I have so many running backs. I'll start asking you some questions about running backs I've collected over the years, to see how you think they're going to pan out, but they're not all in this class. So go ahead and tell me about, start with maybe some of your favorite running backs.
Yeah, I
mean, it's going to play out.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of think back to all the supplemental drafts, right, and some startups that I've done. And I agree with you. I think, the top tier quarterbacks are going to come off the board first, and then there's going to be a big run on running backs, right? And Bijan Robinson from Texas right now is the apple of everybody's Devy eye out there. I mean, he had a phenomenal season at Texas, high recruit coming in. And next year's class, if we want to kind of just break it down by classes, next year we have Breece Hall, plays for Iowa State. He's at the top of my 2022 class. Isaiah Spiller's a nice player. And after that, it's kind of wide open. A lot of people have Zamir White. We're going to talk about maybe a couple sleepers later in the show, and I'll give you some guys. But my philosophy to going into a draft is, I agree with you. You want to try and get those, bell cows, but it does come with some risk too, because you've got guys like Jace McClellan from Alabama, who's in a very crowded situation. Kendall Milton is a running back from Georgia who's still got Zamir White there, but they've got some incoming freshmen. So as much as you want to get those, bell cow running backs, I feel as though there is some sort of risk as well, especially for the ones that you're taking a leap of faith on. But there are far and few, again, if you look at this year's past class, right? We had Etienne, we had Harris, we had Javonte Williams, and then it kind of fell off, right? And I think next year's class is looking the same. 2023 class is looking a little better. You got Jahmyr Gibbs, you got Tank Bigsby, of course you got Bijan Robinson and Chase McClellan, Zach Evans at TCU kind of flashed a little bit. So, But I'm looking at just my overall Devy running back ranks. I'm telling you, after maybe the 11th or 12th one, I mean, then there are just a lot of question marks, a lot of productive players that are going to, hit on the college side, but I'm not sure how many are going to translate to the dynasty roster. So, in the first, I'm going to say draft of your first 2 rounds, I think there's always going to be a run on those heavy running backs. And in the Devy community, I'll tell you right now, people will like Trayvon Henderson. He's a 2024. He's an incoming Ohio State guy. He's getting drafted sometimes 3rd and 4th overall. And we've never even seen the kid play, right?
Okay, let's talk about Trayvon Henderson real quick, because so this is the kid coming out as a freshman, coming into as a freshman at Ohio State.
Right.
I remember 10 years ago or something, I was hanging out with a friend. He had a little kid. We were playing catch football, and the kid told me one day, he said, when I play in the NFL someday, no one's ever going to be able to tackle me. And I said, even the greatest players get tackled, but no one's ever going to be able to tackle me. When I was watching Trayvon Henderson's highlights, I didn't see anybody tackle this guy. Yeah. I mean, literally nobody could tackle the guy. I kept waiting, like, is anyone going to tackle this man? He's like impossible to tackle. It's obviously it's just highlights, but I was like beside myself, like this. And I don't, when you look at Bijan, like Bijan to me is probably the better prospect, but there is something about watching Trayvon Henderson run that I thought to myself, it brought me back 10 years to this kid saying he could never get tackled, because I thought this guy is the closest thing I've ever seen to not getting tackled.
Yeah, I mean, he's a human joystick out there. I mean, and people are excited about him. And look, and he's going to the program, the Ohio State. We know the history of Ohio State running backs, and I like to say the rich get richer with all these programs. The Alabamas and the big programs. But I'll tell you what, I mean, I just did a draft. I did a mock draft with a bunch of guys at the Campus to Canton website as well. And I mean, Trayvon Henderson went in the top 4 or 5, of running backs. I mean, and people are just passing over players they've seen for 2 years be productive in college, going for gold. And I think we all have the tendency to get really excited about the incoming freshman class. And it's amazing how many people, and I've done it myself, will reach for that 2024 guy who is getting all the hype. Could you want to land like what you said at the beginning when let's talk about running backs, right? You want to get the guy who is, because there's value in that, because there's, like I said, there's only 4 or 5, maybe most each year that make it to our dynasty rosters. So I will be passing up looking at a guy who's been very productive in college. Like a guy, let's say Kevin Harris from South Carolina, right? I mean, he was a guy that really produced well last year. I've got question marks on his game only because I've watched a ton of film on him. I mean, I might take a shot with like an LJ Johnson from Texas A&M, because I think I've seen enough of Kevin Harris to know I'm not sure he's going to be an RB1 on my dynasty roster. So, but that's the fun of the game, right? I mean, as we were talking pre-show, the value of all of these players are in the beholder of the person who's watching the film and how they want to construct their roster. And that's just what makes it so fun, because there's guys that I love that are highly ranked in my ranks that people have way down, but I just like them. And I've always had the philosophy, I'm just taking my guy, man. I use ranks as a general guideline, or ADP even. And I'm sure maybe you even do it in your rookie drafts for your dynasty rosters, right? You might take a guy early just because you want him on your roster. So it's, it's just so much fun. But I think the running back right now, as far as that, the 2022 class and 2023 class right now, everyone is fading 2022 running backs and really looking at the 2023 class, and rightfully so. I think there's maybe three or four more guys that really might make it to our dynasty rosters if you compare, those two classes together.
So you mentioned Breece Hall, you mentioned Spiller. I'm going to throw some names at you that I have collected on my Devy team that kind of, Zamir White is one of them. Mm-hmm. That these guys potentially could come out this year. And so these, like I said, I just start stockpiling running back names. And then as we get closer to the draft, I start a couple of the guys I've had look better than they were going to be. Like once I get to the draft, they're not quite as good. But I've had AJ Dillon and I've had some other ones that I was excited about and they stuck. And now they're actually a kind of piece. I have J.K. Dobbins. But so here's a couple names I want to throw at you. So Raymond Davis, Vanderbilt running back.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I watched him play at Temple last year. I'm very excited to see what he does now going to the SEC. and getting that competition. I think I'm going to say I'm a 5, a 1 out of 10 on him. I question just his lateral ability. Big kid. He's, again, he's got that size, but there's really 2 things that I primarily look for when I watch, whether it's a receiver or a running back on film, and it's space creation and play strength. I think those 2 things are kind of what I kind of put at the top. And I'm not sure, Davis has that elite lateral ability to make guys miss that you need in the NFL. But I think he's a solid prospect and a guy who is a little devalued right now. And is a guy that could actually, if he really goes and plays in the SEC and wins against that competition, he's a stock riser for sure.
He's fast. Yeah, he's explosive. And I like the kid. I followed him for years. He was a Northern California kid, and then he transferred over to Temple. And I've been following him for years. And I had some hopes for him. And as it's kind of waning, but that's why I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
So here's another one, Tyler Goodson. I know you've talked about Goodson, and I know I actually heard you say he falls down easier. So I could have already got it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on my YouTube channel, maybe you watched my scouting film on him. I question his play strength. Now, playing for Iowa, you'd love to see him just on another team because that just isn't really an explosive offense, right? But I just have real questions again about his play strength. And if you watch my video on my YouTube channel, you'll see that we really broke down his film. We have again, he just doesn't have that power to move the pile. And I think there's a lot of guys that just falter in the NFL because they're just not simply, don't have that play strength. So Tyler Goodson is not somebody that I'm super excited about. Yeah,
he kind of reminds me of Wayne Gallman. It was like I always liked Wayne Gallman when I saw Goodson. I was like, kind of reminds me of Wayne Gallman, but you never know. You just always hope they could get better. And these are a lot of free ads, but at the same time, like there was a moment when I got him where I thought this guy could be a pro back. So let me give you a couple more. So I talked about Xavier White, and obviously Xavier White has a lot of history. He's kind of a well-known Devy prospect. He was a 5-star prospect, had major knee surgeries. I think he looks explosive. I think that he's on his path back to maybe being a Frank Gore type back. But I don't want to get my hopes up, and I don't like being biased by my own opinion. I've had him for so long that I know that that's what I want to have happen. So I don't necessarily know that that's what other people who maybe don't have the same bias as me think. What are you thinking on Xavier?
I think he's a good asset right now. In fact, I have him number 3 in the class next year, because if I'm going to be looking at running backs, at least from my standpoint, it's kind of what you alluded to earlier. I want guys with size, right? I mean, if you look at the NFL, Christian McCaffrey is 205. And if you run down the list of current NFL running backs under 205, you're not going to be impressed with who those players are. So, regardless of how fast somebody is or elusive, in college, only the exception of the few would make it to be a dynasty asset. I think Xavier White really getting over those 2 ACL injuries. I think he now is maybe mentally over that. I think he looked explosive last year. I think he is a solid asset. The big question mark is really how's the NFL going to question, those knees, from a draft perspective. But I think he's going to lead that backfield in Georgia, and I think he looked explosive. I think he looked great in the spring game. I watch all the spring games. You get excited about them because at least you get to see some of these younger players. I think he's a great asset. I think if he can come out, stay healthy, and play well, I think he's got day 2 draft capital for sure.
Yeah, and he's holding off the younger guys. Speaking of a guy who might be a little undersized, but it's also his backmate, James Cook. So that's another player I have on my Devy that I've just kind of been sitting on because it's Dalvin Cook's little brother, and he's a little undersized, but he does seem like he has some skills in the pass catching. But it seems like there's obviously some limitations, or at least that's the feeling I'm getting. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, I think he'll be a complimentary back like a Kenneth Gainwell that went to the Eagles, as the same kind of guy. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that's running between the tackles in the NFL. So I think he'll be a nice complimentary piece. That's about all I see for him.
All right. Any other running backs, any under the radar guys, anybody who thinks a little overrated in terms of maybe getting a lot of hype that you're not as high on, or guys that are underrated?
Yeah, a guy that I've been getting ripped on my Slack chat because they call me the Devy Reaper because I'm so hard, especially when it comes to running backs. They kill me all the time because every time I do a scouting film, they're like, "Uh-oh, you better start selling. Brandon's coming out with one of his scouting films," But in reality, only the elite make it, right? So I try and be tough. That's a long-winded to answer to your question. I'm going to say is Eric Gray. Now he's a guy who's going to Oklahoma who is getting a ton of buzz right now, and he's like number 3 in a lot of people's class. And again, I question his play strength. If you really watch, and I put 3 films on his video on my YouTube channel, I think he's a guy 5'10", he's 205. I think his stock is going to go through the roof when he plays at Oklahoma in that wide open offense. And I think he's going to light it up, but whether he translates to an NFL roster. So we just did a buy sell show on my dashboard. There's a couple guys, and he was my number one sell. I think after the first couple weeks, he has a good game. I'd be looking to sell Eric Gray because I look at how's he going to translate to the NFL. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to be a 3-down back. He's going to be, I'm going to kind of compare him to a Michael Carter. I think I can kind of see that maybe he could be a bell cow, but I don't really think so. But he'll be a complementary piece. But I think he's valued right now, really as an RB1 and at the next level because it's just so thin, right? We talked about the 2023 class kind of being everyone's excited about because there's going to be kind of like a drop off. A guy that I'm super excited about, and I'm like on an island with this guy, is Tyler Algier from BYU. He is like my flag plant player. I love this kid. He's a linebacker turned running back. He played running back in high school. He played it for his first 2 years at BYU. He played, linebacker. And then last year he got the rock and he really impressed me. He did play in a wide open scheme. So I think he has to improve his lateral ability anymore, but I love his size. I love his toughness, his contact balance, the way he pummels people. And he's kind of my Javonte Williams riser for next year. I got him ranked pretty high. In fact, I got him number 4 just after Zamir White in the 2022 class.
I had to pause. I'm looking him up right now. I'm trying to find him. So is it spelled ELDR? Algier?
No, Algier, ALLGEIER.
Let me get this in here. We'll get back to the show.
Yeah, no problem. I have a film on him.
BYU. I'm gonna have to check him out. Because, like I said, my draft is going on today. We'll see what's going on there.
Oh yeah, if he'd be a guy that is going to
somewhere
fall
in the middle
late.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's got a guy.
Running the names, I like it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so let's move on to wide receivers here in the 2022 class. Another position that feels like maybe not quite as exciting as these last couple of years. The 2022 class, maybe just not its own fault, just kind of following up after some of these stronger classes, doesn't feel as exciting at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I think that's the overall feeling. Like I said before, for the 2022 class, right? There's just it feels top heavy, right? I mean, you got 4 or 5 solid options. You got Garrett Wilson right now is my number 1 guy from Ohio State. He should really play very, very well. Treylon Burks is a guy who I like to call the Devy darling right now. 3 months ago, he was everyone's 3rd and 4th option, and now he's everyone's 1st. I feel like it's like the Twitter echo chamber of, once everyone starts building up a player, you see trends that happen, but he's still up there. My rank's number 2. George Pickens is like my favorite receiver of that class as far as the skill set. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL, so he's not going to be playing this year, but I love his alpha mentality as long as he can keep his head on straight because he is a little kind of nutso out there on the field. I don't know if you saw that fight that he had against, I think it was Georgia Tech or whatever. But
I don't mind a little fighting. Personally, like fighting doesn't bother me, especially on the football field, just because there is so much aggression. It does. There's emotional levels of like how much you can hold, your own emotions together. And that's right. What worries me is it sometimes it spills over to off the field because it's the same kind of decision-making mechanisms that go on.
Right. So I'm hoping this ACL tear, he can maybe like, okay, well, let's not take this for granted and kind of focus on, pulling that, the intangibles side of the player, can hold it together a little bit. I mean, Chris Olave, I was always surprised he came back for, his final year at Ohio State, kind of like Devonta Smith. So I think that was a surprise for a lot of people. You got David Bell from Purdue, and a guy that I'm really high on that I think is a big riser is Jahan Dotson from Penn State. Did a film on him also on my YouTube channel. I'm a big fan of him. I think he's got all the ball skills to go up and get it. He's got some, average speed, not a blazer, but I think again, he creates space. He's tough at the catch point, a guy that I'm really excited about. But, after that, there's just a lot of mystery. You got Justin Ross, everyone's excited about. He just got reestablished at Clemson. Joe Nagata, I'm a big fan of,
what was the name?
Joe Nagata.
Joe Nagata.
Yeah, from Clemson. Yeah, those two. I'm really intrigued, really, by all of the big programs. You think of Ohio State, Alabama, right? I mean, they got new quarterbacks, they've got new running backs, wide receivers. There's just a lot of intrigue for these big programs. Clemson now, so it's going to be really exciting. Georgia, has a bunch of new receivers coming up and stuff. So it's pretty exciting. But I think the 2022 class of wide receivers is going to be top heavy, 3 or 4 options. And Did you feel, let me ask you a question. Did you feel in your rookie drafts that, for your Devy leagues, that after round 2, you feel like you were just throwing darts?
Oh, well, Devy, no, Dynasty or Devy? Because Devy, this is my only one, and I'm about to do it.
Yeah, Dynasty.
Oh, yeah. By the time it's like the 15th, 14th, I would be praying sometimes right there in the middle of the second. Just somebody would make a bad decision or just like pick one of these random guys so that I would get one of the pieces I would desire. Because, yeah, it's brutal this year. And, I think that the 2021, 2022 classes are also affected a little bit by the COVID, by the fact that their college football production. We still may not know exactly who from the 2021 class is actually the best wide receiver. We might come to find out that the guys emerged from, the Quez Watkins catching balls or all these random guys, Daz Newsome's. There was a lot of guys who maybe just didn't have a chance to show completely what they can do or the competition they were playing against, all these different variables that go in. And I think the same thing is going to affect the 2022 class as well. So I'm going to be, especially with Devy and just, I'm always trying to stay fluid, but this time of year and this run of years with college football and everything, I think we need to stay even more fluid. Yes, we have the top heavy ones who are obvious. And a lot of those guys last year, they just kind of said, I'm not even going to deal with the season. I know I can get drafted. And then everybody else kind of fought, and some like Zach Wilson's kind of emerged. And so I think the same thing will happen this year and then we'll still have to wait another year or two to let it all settle down, because there's players this year that aren't going to be playing. There's going to be the college, the way this Delta variant is moving and the way college football is more aggressive to protect the players than the NFL is. I have a feeling we're going to see similarities to last year, where there's going to be limited games, limited schedules. They're not going to be traveling all over to play each other. The things are going to be limited in college football compared to the NFL. And so again, we're going to get a limited amount of information that we're going to have to sift through, which I always like, kind of, because then, the more you're paying attention, you pick up little nuggets here and there.
Yeah, and I think it just comes down to then you need to be able to do your own due diligence and take the limited film if there is a God forbid a big COVID something where games are getting canceled, and you just take the information that's given to you and with the film and make your own decisions. But yeah, hopefully that doesn't really play a huge role. But yeah, so I mean, I'm excited. A lot of good players for 2022 as far as the wide receivers. I think there's going to be some players.
What about tight end?
Oh, tight end. Well, I think there's really, as far as next year, Jalen Weidemeyer from Texas A&M, Jaleel Billingsley from Alabama is, my second. I think Cade Otton from Washington, although I got really burned on Hunter Bryant. I really liked him, and, he really didn't pan out. But I think Cade Otton is a lot more physical and has the ability to block. But I think that tight end is such a hard position. If we get one or two out of there, and then there could be some diamonds out, that we're just not,
and like Charlie Kohler, I know there was I had to choose between Billingsley and Kohler in this offseason and Devy, and I just dropped Kohler because I figured there's no upside there. It feels like at best he's like a Witten if everything went, incredibly well. Yeah,
and Billingsley, I think is he going to play the Pitts role? Because I don't believe they're going to put Pitts in line a lot. I mean, I think he's going to be a receiver primarily. I think that Billingsley, just given his, he's a little light, so I don't see him being a premier blocker. So I think
that.
I think he's going to be more of a flex. It's going to be interesting because him and John Mechie right now are going to be the two leading receivers in Bama. So I think he is going to be looked at maybe more of like a slot guy. We'll have to see where they line him up, but he played a lot out of the slot or, just like in bunch formations right off the line. So I can see him, it'd be great for fantasy, right? If he kept the tight end tag, but was really played more like a wide receiver. But yeah, I mean, there's some guys that could emerge. And as the season goes, but I mean, I think those two are the top. And of course, as far as tight end in 2023, Michael Mayer from Notre Dame is in all of my Devy drafts. He is the first one who is going off the board. And again, he's the crown jewel right now. It used to be Eric Gilbert until he kind of flip-flopped from LSU to Florida to now he's
he wants to be a wide receiver now. Yeah. I think he's showing some emotional maturity things, decision making, those kind of things. People don't. It always pushes me away quickly because where's your team? Where's your decision making team? Why aren't you going through processes and making these instead of just constantly being reactive? We never know. We don't know their situation.
That's true. And intangibles are the one wild card that none of us know with these players. How smart they are, how what's their work ethic. Do they just do they live on their athleticism because they think they can, and then they go to college and they're like, oh shit. I mean, I'm playing with people that are stronger and smarter than me, and can they catch up? Yeah, so I think there's a big red flag with Gilbert right now, given all the uncertainty of but if he comes out and tears it up with 900 yards and 8 touchdowns and looks dynamic, people will forget all about that.
So let's move to that 2023 class. I think 2023 reminds me of the 2020 class. I remember back in 2018 talking about the 2020 class and how it's going to be so good. I just can't wait till the 2020 class. And I used to call it the nothing. Remember, I don't know if you remember that from the podcast. I would always say the nothing is coming, the nothing's coming. And it was the 2022 class, or the 2020 class was going to come and take all the running back jobs. And in a way it did. And I feel like the 2023 class has that similar feel. It's just so much talent, so many players that it's hard. Like I did happen to sell one first round pick from 2023 because it's 2 years from now. And I'm looking at my team and it's so set to win. And I'm going, okay, well, this player, it's like, it just felt like, okay, I can give that up. And it's 2 years. I'm paying, I don't have to pay for it for 2 years, but in most cases, I have no intentions of trading any of my 2023 picks.
Oh, well, I think that's the word on the street right now. I mean, people are saying, give up, sell your 2020 seconds and 2020 thirds, put a package together and accumulate as much 2023 as you can. And, and I guess I agree with that. I mean, I'm pretty plugged in and seeing what players are in what classes here. But I'm not sure it's going to be this overwhelming, maybe from the running back position, but from the other positions, I'm not sure it's going to be this landslide of talent coming to our dynasty rosters. And, it should be interesting just to see after another year of production of these players, because
that's well said. I think you're right with the running backs. They are when you get a good class of running backs, it skews everybody's mindset. And there's probably 5, maybe even more potentially really good running backs. And we'll see by the time we actually get there. But I think you're right. I think that is the big thing. It's the running back. There's so many of those jewels that that first round is going to be amazing because it's going to have so many running backs, and then it pushes everything else back. And there's just lots of value for at least a round. And I think that's what everybody's looking at. They want 2 rounds of value.
Yeah, and I think you're right. But I mean, if you look at the 2023 quarterback situation, right? You got DJ Uiagalelei. I think that's how you say his name. Yeah. I should know by now, but I don't. I'm sorry. I bastardize people's names all the time. And then you have Bryce Young, who we haven't even seen play yet, right? So we're basing that, other than that, you got CJ Stroud, who we haven't seen play yet, right? Other than that,
that's pretty weak. If you're talking super flex and everything, that is not an impressive.
I mean,
not nearly as impressive.
So you've got a guy we've seen play 1.5 games, albeit DJ played against Notre Dame and showed well, when Lawrence got hurt last year. Bryce Young, we haven't seen play.
And Bryce Young's not a real big guy. He's kind of a Kyler Murray type, right? I mean,
he's 5'11".
He's shorter. He's a little more of he's athletic. There's always concerns with me with those type of players because you really have to not just put it together. You have to put it together better than that.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. And then CJ Stroud, I mean, he's got Kyle McCord, and then the Ewers kid, who's been the talk of the town, Quinn Ewers, if you don't know who he is and all
the
that.
Mullet, man. Who doesn't know who the mullet is now? Everybody's talking about the mullet.
I'm already fatigued. I can't talk about it anymore. I already got Ewers fatigue, and he hasn't even been on campus yet. I'm already tired of talking about him. So from going to the 2023 class, right? I mean, those are your 3 QBs, and man, it is just wide open after that. I mean, there is actually nobody that, except for Max Johnson, who's probably another guy that you might want to target, if we talk after show. Max Johnson, the LSU quarterback. Miles Brennan just broke his arm, so there's no more competition there. That's one of my sleepers. That's like one of my guys, my flag planners that I think he could be potentially, he's Brad Johnson's son. So it's really cool. I mean, it's a great story. They watch film. They practice all week together. They watch his film after each game and break it down. So his dad, was a successful QB that played in the NFL. I think he's a riser, but he's my 4th QB in that 2023 class right now. So after that, I mean, it's guys that everyone's expecting to either start playing this year and have potential, but it's a weak class for, quarterbacks, that's assuming, if we get DJ, Young, and Stroud, then it'll be a successful class. But these kids haven't even played yet.
Yeah, and like I said, we're hyping it up. I think it's the running back. So let's talk about those running backs. Talk to me about this amazing, hyped up 2023 class of running backs. And I'll have a couple questions because I've got a couple of them myself.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like Bijan Robinson is again the guy. I mean, he's got all the skill set. He's got the size. He's 6'2", 220 something pounds. He's can catch the ball. He's big. He's physical. He's got the lateral movement. He's got the space creation. Right. I talked about space creation and play strength. I think has elite traits in both of those. He's going to be fed the rock, and Jahmyr Gibbs from Georgia Tech, he's my number 2 in that class. Really a good size, again, 5'11", he's 200, but I'll bet you'll be at least 210 by the time he makes it to the NFL. Super elusive kid, again, great pass catcher out of the backfield. And Tank Bigsby from Auburn, is that pretty much those 3 are my tier 1 in that class, right? Those are the guys that we've seen play. Those are the guys that we've, they're playing for good programs. We like their skill sets. The guy after that is Chase McClellan from Alabama. Now he should be getting the ball a lot this year. But he's going to be, in a timeshare probably with Brian Robinson, because Brian Robinson is a senior and they're going to, give him the opportunity. Zach Evans from TCU's in that class. I did on my YouTube channel, I recorded every carry from Zach Evans last year. So you can go watch all 50 something of his carries. And, I thought his game looked decent, but 5'11", 195, but after that, you got a lot of question marks. You got Kendall Milton, Marshawn Lloyd, a guy I'm really excited about this year. He's probably the one guy that I'm most excited playing for South Carolina. He's tore his ACL last year. He was a high recruit coming in. And unfortunately, in the spring last year, tore his ACL. So he's somebody I'm super excited to watch. Then you got a bunch of guys that, after that, I could go down the list, but they're question marks that aren't, slam dunks at this point to make it to our dynasty roster. So, I feel like there's 3 guys in the 2023 class that we've seen enough tape in 1 year to think that they are going to translate to the dynasty rosters. And the rest of these guys, I think there's a lot of, still a lot of work to do to see who can join these 3 at the top.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question here. So a guy you didn't name, and this is a speculation play because he actually hasn't played any college, so there's nothing you can actually watch on him. But a player that I think is going to be a steal, especially when I hear that you don't mention him, and I can never find anybody talking about him, Deb. I think I mentioned him on your site. And I took him over Zach Evans last year. So I had a rookie draft last year, and I was at the 10 spot, I think. And Zach Evans was there. And I just did some research on Zach Evans, and I felt like we just talked about, indecisive. He was doing some weird things. He said he didn't love football at one point, and he didn't even like watching football. Certain things I just said, I don't know about this kid. Obviously, there was so much hype about him as an athlete. So I passed on him for Demarcus Bowman.
I knew you were going to say that.
That's my boy. I love me some Demarcus
Bowman. I'm going down my list. I'm like, I did Demarcus Bowman.
Demarcus Bowman, man. Yeah. I love me some Demarcus Bowman. And the fact that, and he's one of those where he changed his mind and moved schools, but it was for a very good reason. His grandpa passed away. He was going to go to Clemson because his grandpa was going to be in the area and watch the games. And once his grandpa passed away, he felt like there was no reason for him to be there. So he shipped it back to Florida. And now he's going to be playing for Florida this year. And yes, he's a little undersized, but I think just like Jahmyr Gibbs, who I got in the second round, by the way, I got Jahmyr Gibbs as my late pick in the second round. And I'll just pass that on to guys who are Devy, and you're reading. If you go to 24/7 and you're looking at the 4 and 5 star prospects, make sure you check out those 4-star, even 3-star. I think Saquon was like a 3 or 2-star, because I watched Jahmyr Gibbs highlight films, and it was just based on and I liked him better than almost all the running backs above him. And I almost took him. If Zach Evans and Marcus Bowman hadn't been there, I would have taken Jahmyr Gibbs probably, because I was like, this guy, I can't believe he's rated a 94. Remember, every one of these rankings, these 4-star and 5-star, it just comes from one random person who gives them that ranking, who's a scout who's following him around. Some scouts might like guys a little bit more. Some scouts might be a little more forgiving than others and might give that 5-star rating, where another guy didn't. He's just a little harder on his backs. And so Jahmyr Gibbs was like a 90. I'm looking at a 96 here. Whatever it was compared to the 99s of some of these other players, I just was like, this kid can catch, he can run, he's strong at the tackle point. And so I got him in the second round. And so the Demarcus Bowman one, I feel like he's the same kind of player. He was like 185, 190, but I feel like he can put on a little bit of mass, get to that 200-pound threshold. And I don't know if I've ever seen a player as explosive as Demarcus Bowman. I mean, this dude is so explosive.
Yeah, and I agree. And that when you watch high school film, I always kind of put a caution to the wind, right? Because most of the guys at the top, and when you're looking at those 24/7 rankings, they dominate their high school film. But that's because they're just so much more physically gifted and much better than a lot of the competition that they're playing for. You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm intrigued. I haven't watched a ton of film. I mean, I watched Bowman last year a little bit, so I can't really speak to his specific skill sets. But he should get a great opportunity in Florida.
He's going to be a monster. The only concern I have is his ability to put on weight. He is pretty rocked up for his stature, so it's hard to see him gaining too much more mass. But in terms of just his work ethic, I've been following this kid because I drafted him in my Devy, obviously. And I just feel like watching him in interviews and everything, this is a kid who wants to be great. And I think he has a great support system and literally a skill set that I'm telling you, I don't know if there's any player in college football as explosive as DeMarcus Bowman. That's why I find it interesting, because he's a running back. He's a 5-star, 99.09, whatever ranked running back on 24/7. He's a Devy player that hasn't played yet, hasn't gotten any time, and yet he's down on. So if you just look at Devy, I walked the draft and he went like number 80 overall or something, and I was like, 80 overall. He's all the players that went ahead of him. I was thinking, like, this is the kind of play that the bet that I love to make, because a player like DeMarcus Bowman can be just game changer type, just like when he gets on the field, when finally people get to see him, even if you're not convinced he's going to be a pro asset, he's going to get some hype real soon in terms of just his college, just his being Devy value is going to skyrocket here real soon, in my opinion. Just give him a chance to get on the field.
I love the call. I mean, he's going pretty high in a lot of the mocks that I'm seeing.
Okay,
yeah,
I mean, you're in more, but when I saw a couple of them, I was surprised that people were kind of, not because he hadn't played yet, I guess people were just kind of passing on him. But
right, and we live in a "what have you done for me lately" world, right? So I mean, people are going to take what they've seen already versus what potentially could be, because we've seen a lot of 5-star prospects as well not pan out, right? So I'm hoping Florida. I forget the name of the running back who's ahead of him. I know there's a senior there who I don't think is translatable to the NFL. I don't know off the top of my head who it is, but I would love to see them just give Bowman the ball.
I think he's going to get the ball. They talked about him already being a part of that.
That's great. That'd be, but you're absolutely right. He comes out and packs on 900 yards, 10 TDs, and catches 15, 20 balls out of the backfield. He's going to skyrocket and be right up into that class. So I think that's a great, for your listeners out there who are playing Devy, great trade target right now to go out and get yourself and take a shot with the kid. I love it.
I love it too. So I'm glad you got my support. I got your support on that one, because, like I said, there are certain players that I've been banking on for the future. Because as I told you, my Devy team, I'm always trying to build, these freshman guys coming in. So let's move to the wide receivers with this 2023 class. I know that the big name that coming out was Julian Fleming. Is he still at the top of the rankings, or is there anybody who's kind of you feel might have surpassed him?
No, I think there's a lot of people just that is such a crowded Ohio State wide receiver room, right? I mean, you got Olave and the other guy we were just talking about, Garrett Wilson, right? And so where does he come in? And not only that, you got Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had that spectacular catch last year, flashed in the spring game. I got him as my third in my tier 1. So yeah, he's kind of fallen a little bit, because a lot of people feel, I think, that that early production wasn't there. He wasn't really able to break in last year, and like if this year he can't break that receiving rotation, I think he's going to probably, his value will still be devalued a little bit and depressed, because he's just not getting the play time. And there's been a lot of conversation in the Devy circles on Twitter and even in my chat about like who is going to transfer out of this room, right? Because you've got Marvin Harrison Jr., who's an incoming freshman who flashed in the spring game. And there's only so many mouths to feed. So Wilson and Olave next year are going to go to the NFL. So guys are going to slide up. So you might have to wait another year. But yeah, Julian Fleming's a guy who is kind of fallen down, who isn't being drafted in the first 5 or 6 rounds. There's another kid, I forget his name, Abika or something like that. He's another incoming freshman, and he's getting a lot of buzz right now too. So there's just so many mouths to feed in Ohio State.
So that's interesting to me. Do you think it's fair? Do you think that it's actually Julian Fleming not living up to his hype, or do you think that it's just because of the situation and that maybe it's a goodbye opportunity?
Well, I think he's had injury issues. I think he's been getting nicked up, and he just can't stay consistently on the field. If my memory recalls is serving me well here, I think that he is not even 100% right now, or he is just getting back to 100%. I think he got nicked up a little bit last year, but yeah, I mean, he's got like I said, it's a very crowded receiver room, and they got like 2 more high recruits even coming in next year's class. I mean, it's just, people want to play for Brian Hartline, the wide receivers coach there. He's one of the best in the business, and he's a fantastic recruiter. So, the big question, like I said, is, who's going to get out of this Ohio State room to go be productive somewhere else to get on the, the NFL map?
For sure. Okay, so if you could give me 3 names of wide receivers, maybe if you were shot into the future to next year and you had to do your Devy draft, a dynasty draft where you're actually doing a rookie draft, but we're at 2023 now and you're just thinking, okay, I don't have any information besides what I have right now. Give me the 3 wide receivers that you would take top of that list.
Well, I think that you can ask a lot of people in Devy right now who their number 1 wide receiver overall is, and they're going to tell you it's Kayshon Boutte from LSU. And he just he was a fantastic freshman last year, especially with all the 2 different quarterbacks that had played. We talked about Max Johnson, Miles Brennan, but he really balled out at the end of the year last year and had a phenomenal, it was just some crazy 200-yard game, 3 TDs at the end of the season. And Raheem Jarrett is my number 2 in that class. He plays for Maryland. And Jackson Smith and Jigba I have here at number 3. I have Marvin Mims from Oklahoma, then Quentin Johnson from TCU, and Jermaine Burton from Georgia, Josh Downs from North Carolina. There's some other players, but these people who keep just talking about this 2023 class that's just loaded. Again, I think it's top heavy. I think there's those 5 players I just mentioned, those 6 with Jermaine Burton, we've seen film on to a certain degree. Not really Smith and the Jigba from Ohio State. But the rest of them, you got EJ Williams kind of flashed at Clemson, Parker Washington, your guy that you spoke about as well. I've got right at my tier 2. I got him number 9 right now in my ranks. Julian Fleming, I have at number 10. So some nice players, but I'm not sure how many alpha dogs are going to be coming out of that class right now. I think there's a lot of football that have to be played before we tout this 2023 wide receiver class as something that is just superior to 2022. That's just my approach. That's my opinion. So
I like it. I like that you're bringing, pushing back a little bit, because pretty much everywhere I hear everyone just they hype up the 2023 class, myself included, without really specifically laying down who and what is causing it to be such a valuable class. And I really think when we talk about it, it comes down to that potentially 5 or 6 bell cow type running backs.
That's it.
It's just it makes the whole thing sparkle a lot better. Okay, we could talk tight end, but you already talked about Meyer. That's like the main guy. And so I want to just talk a little. We'll move on to the freshman class coming in. Just a couple of these players that, in case some of these, to me, the way I build my Devy team now is my team is set. It's set in terms of professional players, and I have a good stockpile of young players that are coming each year. So my goal is now to just get the best possible freshmen coming in, the best guys that are coming in. And then I'm just looking at 24/7s. I'm, looking at interviews. I'm going to huddle.com or whatever, and trying to get as many little images I can of some of these players. And I find this so much fun every year, Brandon. Honestly, this is, even though I'm not a Devy guy, and I go onto your channel and I feel lost because there's so much Devy talk, and I feel like I'm just so out of my realm. It's like I don't even know who that guy is. But I really get into this. For me, I like to just sit down and start scouting this. So there are players here that I've been watching. We talked about Ohio State, and you were talking about all the positional depth. Same thing at running back. Evan Pryor, to me, is one of my favorite running backs coming out here. And the fact that he's behind Trayvon Henderson, it's like a buy window for me as well. Like, I'm looking at Evan Pryor and I'm saying, okay, how long can I wait to get this guy? Because I still think that, and he's going to probably have the benefit of not getting much wear and tear throughout his career, because he's going to be behind Trayvon Henderson, or at least working with him. And I just loved what I saw from the player. So it's one of those things where it's obviously not ideal to go behind another stud who's probably even a better prospect than you, but I still think he's a fantastic prospect. I don't know why he chose Ohio State. Tell me what you think about Evan Pryor. Have you seen much? Obviously, he's just coming out of high school.
Yeah, I've watched a little bit of film on him. I can't say that I've watched an extensive, and that's like one thing I'll do. If I haven't really watched a lot of a player, I'm not going to sit here and say that I have. Sure. So, again, he was in a lot of the conversations of Ohio State that we have. Is he going to transfer? if Trayvon Henderson gets the rock this year and he established himself, and he is the number 1 back in that class. I mean, he's in a tier all by himself. Like I said earlier, he's being ranked. He's like the 5th or 6th, in a startup Devy league running back coming off the field, coming off the board, and we haven't even seen him play yet. But like we talked about before, he's a joystick out there. He looks incredible. I love your approach to it, though. Regardless if you loved his film, and that's what's great about. And I tell my guys all the time, take your guys, because you can go through history. And I know Devy Watch did this great breakdown last year of all of the classes and the ranks and the stars and all of that. And I mean, the majority of the players that go to the NFL aren't even in the top 5 when it comes to the star rankings of each position of each season. So if like you said, if you watch Evan Pryor and you love what you see, Take him over a Kamar Wheaton, who's ranked number 2, maybe in that class going to Alabama, and I always say that you just take the guys like Corey Kiner's a guy that I like from LSU, probably more than most people. I just did a breakdown and threw it on my YouTube channel as well. So he's just a guy that I like. So you take your guy, but I think Trayvon Henderson and LJ Johnson and Donovan Edwards are the top 3 in that class for me from just the film that I've watched. And I probably have Evan Pryor a little farther down just in my positional ranks anyway, just because of his situation. We might not see him for another year. So,
another thing I like to do and this is like my base level amateurish scouting type things. I'm always looking at guys, the weight and the build, because I think sometimes when they're getting these rankings, you'll see players like a Chris Tyree or some of these players that I just don't see a real path to the NFL, or at least anything besides a Nyheim Hines type position. And yet they're getting a 5-star 99 type rating because they're really good at what they do, but it doesn't necessarily mean they project to the NFL. So that's the other thing. I'm always kind of looking at weight, and if I see a weight that's questionable, I'll go and actually try to see their build, see if it looks like they can add weight, kind of their slimmer build, or if there's somebody who's already kind of rocked out. What do you think of Will Shipley?
Will Shipley, I did a spring game film on him.
Talk to me about this kid, because it's intriguing. There's something about this kid that's very intriguing to me. I like him.
Yeah, I mean, coach is just really loving what they're seeing with him. And his spring game was really, he came out flat. I mean, a lot of people were talking in the Devy community after the spring game. People were super excited to see him. He really didn't show very well. In fact, Phil Maffa is another Clemson, incoming freshman, actually looked a little better. He's a little bigger. You talk about his size. I mean, Phil Maffa is 6'1", 215. He's coming in as a freshman with that, that big frame already. But I think Will Shipley is going to be given the opportunity. I know that Lynn J. Dixon and a couple other guys, and Kobe Pace, I believe, are in front of him, like on the depth chart right now. But all the reports out of camp right now is saying that Will Shipley is looking good, and he's got a lot of speed. So I think they're going to give him. But I mean, his high school film looked great, and it should have. He was a high recruit. He dominated in high school. So I'm very, very cautious when I watch high school film. I think it's a lot harder to watch and to really decipher true talent out of that high school film, because these kids, especially in the top 10 of each position, they're in a class by themselves. So they should be looking exceptional.
Completely agree.
When they're out there playing.
I completely agree, and it's very hard to even find good film on these players. And like I said, a lot of times they're playing against a bunch of kids who are not even going to be playing college football.
Exactly.
But what I always look for is oftentimes his personality traits. And I was watching him. I don't know where it was. I find stuff on the interviews or different things about him personally. And his work ethic, I mean, he was training like a professional player in high school. This kid has his own gym and is just like full on in training mode every day. And I was like, geez, that is the kind of approach. And so, yeah, maybe my worry about Shipley is maybe he's maxing out on his potential a little too early. Like this might be the best version we've seen him, because he's already kind of like, he's put himself to work himself up to his highest level potentially. And I don't know how much more on top he can be, but it's intriguing. And I just find him funny because as like a stocky little white kid, he just doesn't look the part of most of the running backs. And so it's kind of funny to me when a player like that gets a 99 rating as one of the gems, the darlings. And so I'm curious, like I said, I hadn't heard anything about the spring games, but I did watch him and just was intrigued by his professionalism and how he was approaching football at a young age.
Yeah, and a lot of people have like a comp of CMC, which I think is like super lazy, and I'm like, stop.
He's stockier though. But he is fast, but he's kind of. It feels like that's why maybe I'm worried that I don't know that he can put on a lot of weight. Like he's already done a lot of gym work. He feels to me quite developed.
Yeah,
any more development coming.
Mm-hmm. That same Devy Watch thing that they did a couple years ago when they did the 5 stars, they actually did an average weight gain of freshmen from looking at the 24/7, weights to, I think they took it to their junior year. And on average, it was a between 13 and 15 pounds on average, a running back put on weight from, coming in as a freshman to that. So they were, and then they actually broke it down to like what was the ideal kind of size for hit rates over the last 10 years. So they did a phenomenal job breaking that down. And I think it was actually under 200 pounds.
That makes sense, because you're 195, you're 198 or whatever, and you're just starting to develop. Then by the time you come into the pros, you're 215.
That's right.
A lot of these guys haven't gotten the college workout program.
Oh, exactly.
But that's what that would be my concern maybe a little bit with Shipley, is that from what I see, he might have already had that college program in his garage.
Mhm.
And so he's, that it might, it's like, it's good. And then the downside might be there's not as much upside to him. So.
Yeah, he's still being taken right after Henderson. I mean, in the top 2 or 3 of the class. So people are, they're looking at it's Clemson, 24/7 ranking. And in the Devy community, to nobody's fault, that's what most people do, because nobody has time to go grind film on all these players. They might see a highlight or watch a 5-minute huddle film and be like, oh, I like what I see. Oh, he's got the rating. He's playing for Clemson. Oh, he has to be good, right? So, I mean,
for sure.
So
I find that I try to use because like I said, I don't do a lot of scouting, especially with high school players. I am big on certain traits, so letting my eye kind of tell me when it sees something. And there's certain, so you talked about Emeka Egbuka. That was the one that he's going to Ohio State as well. There's another kid that came out 2 years ago, I know, and I don't know where he's at now. G. Scott. Do you remember G. Scott?
Yeah, G. Scott he was at Ohio State, and I think he transferred. No, I think he may have transferred, but I think they moved him also to tight end somewhere.
I was a big fan of how physical that guy. He never had a lot of speed or anything, but I had not seen many wide receivers abuse people the way G. Scott had. And so, but anyway, Emeka Egbuka is kind of the top of the ratings here. Anybody that stands out to you in terms of other guys, obviously it's so hard with the freshmen in the high school, but I find that it is valuable to be aware of these players coming in, because when you run out of names and you run out of lists and you're looking to college, then all of a sudden it's just like, well, this guy could potentially be a superstar and he's just a name, but hey, he's a name with 5 stars or 4 stars next to him. So what are some of those names that are standing out to you coming in?
I think the guy at the top of my list is Agai Hall from Alabama. In the spring game, he looked like an alpha. He made some tremendous catches. I love his build. He's 6'3", 190 already. He's going to Alabama. We know what the history of Alabama wide receivers are. And the guy I have right after that is JoJo Earl. I think he's like a Jalen Waddle 2.0, 5'9", 170. He'll probably be maybe 190 by the time he's all said and done getting the NFL. I mean, just a dynamic player. Mario Williams from Oklahoma had a nice spring game. Marvin Harrison Jr. is in there, and I know that I watch your posts when you're on that Slack chat. I know that
Troy Franklin.
Troy Franklin. I was just gonna say, you know what? I did a film on him and it's on my YouTube channel too. The dude looked good.
I don't know what it is I saw about Troy Franklin, but I'm telling you, I always trust my eye, and I came away with Troy Franklin, and it was because I watched him in some of those high school one-on-ones where they wear all the pads all over their head and all these funny stuff. Yeah. Some stuff it was the confidence, it was the swagger, it was this guy. He's better than the people on the field with him. Every time I see him, it's Troy Franklin, man. I was going to ask you about it. Go ahead, tell me.
Yeah, I think he looked great in that Oregon spring game, and again, I got a film on my YouTube channel showing that it was he looked really good. I mean, he's a little undersized at 170 pounds, but but the question is,
he's
Oregon,
lean.
Yeah, he's lean. I mean, Oregon, be really nice. Now, what you talk about intangibles. I saw him with an interview, and he said, and I forget exactly how long ago, but there hasn't been a wide receiver one drafted in the first round of the NFL draft out of Oregon, I think he said, for 20-something years. So
he's tracking this. I love my boy Troy Franklin.
Yeah.
So he's already on this, and he's already gaming himself to be
he says he is going to be the next first round draft pick and it was a long time, maybe 20 years, 15. I don't know. It's just been a long freaking time. And he said, I'm telling you right now, I'm working towards being that. So I'm sure you love hearing that. Right
I love hearing that. And just for his confidence, there was something about him. Like I said, you don't get much to work with these freshman players. So when I'm watching and I'm just kind of scouring and I'm looking at interviews or whatever it is, certain names stand out. And for some reason, I remember coming on your thing and like, what about Troy Franklin? Anybody see? Because no one was talking about this guy they went to Oregon. And I was like, what about this kid? He looks really, and I get he's 170 pounds. But like you said, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, maybe. As a wide receiver, this kid is slim. So I think he could add 20 pounds. He could be 190. And a lot of these wide receivers coming out, the Olaves and the Gilbert, they're all, or not Gilbert, Wilson, they're all right there. Right. 190 kind of range. So I have
a name for you because you got your draft coming up. All right. So get your pencil out. Yes. All right. I use this term Devy darling a lot because I see trends. I see like on Twitter and all the Devy guys talking about Xavier Worthy playing for Texas. All right. So he's a guy right now. Texas, that room's wide open in Texas to, they still haven't figured out their QB over there yet, whether it's going to be Hudson Card, I think, or the other kid, Casey. But Xavier Worthy is a speedster, 6'1", 160. He's a guy right now in the Devy community. I like I said, like to call him the Devy darling. He's rising up boards right now. He's getting, people are posting him all over Twitter. He's a guy you want to target. Take a shot with him.
All right, I'm going to have him. It's on my list here. I love it.
Cool.
Yeah, it's that's why it's so much fun. Devy, to me, there's a lot of things about Dynasty that I wouldn't say they get old, but it's kind of old hat. I've been doing it for so long, and I know all the different things. And when I start turning to these 24/7, it's like a whole new excitement. I just like, wow, look at all these. And then, it's funny. I don't watch college football. I scout college players, but I don't sit around on Saturdays. I barely can have enough time to watch Sunday football.
Right.
So I don't, it's funny to me that I compete with a lot of Dynasty players or Devy players that watch college football. And yet they let me get a lot of good players. They're always so focused on their favorite college players that I feel like being somebody who doesn't watch all the college football and is just scouring for the potential guys to make it to the NFL, it's almost easier in a way because I can kind of like remove any kind of personal biases that I've had. And I just come in looking for like who. And so sometimes I tell you every year I find new gems. I'm like, the Jaleel Billingsley, just in the middle of the year, I picked him up last year. He was just sitting there and I was like, oh, this guy's supposed to be good next year. I'll take him. Like I said, I don't watch the games. I just follow I'm always with my ears open, always trying to see what's going on. And I love to read things. I love to listen to interviews. And so this is so much fun for me. I just think that you really, I remember when I think you started out as a Dynasty podcast.
I did.
Recall, and then you switched it over to the Deep Dive Devy.
I did.
And I think it was so smart. And it's great. It's just like so much fun. I like I said, I was looking forward to this podcast and I knew I wasn't even going to have to do much because I really don't know that much. I knew you were going to talk, but I just, like it gets me so excited. I was just trying to do a little bit of reading and saying, what can I challenge him with? Where can I ask him? Because this is so much more fun to me than talking Dynasty. So thank you, Brandon, for coming on. Man, this has been, and we're going to get you back on because we're going to do this some more. I want to talk more Devy. It's just it's so much. There's something about, and us as Dynasty players, it's natural for us to want to see what's next. It's like there's only so much time we can spend on the 2021 class. Then we have our drafts. Then there's that letdown. Well, guess what? There's like a couple weeks ago, I actually dove into the Devy stuff because I was like feeling this lull of no excitement. And all of a sudden I just pulled up my Devy stuff and it was like a whole new excitement, all kinds of new information to dive through. And I think that's, and then it helps you out down the road. I've learned watching so many players succeed or fail and based on where they were coming from and everything that I think in the long run, you start to just get some kind of awareness and kind of, it's almost like I can't even put a word on it, but you start to feel the ebbs and flows of things before they happen.
Yeah, and I think that's the nice part of Devy. And even if you have a shallow Devy league, just keeping your ear to the ground. And that's like what the dashboard is for me, is like I just had 2 guys join this week and they're like, I'm starting my first Devy league. I want to start learning about players and it's really fun. And like you said in my beginning of my podcast, I was the Dynasty Deep Dive podcast. And I'm like, how many deep dive players can there really be? I mean, how many guys can I talk about each week? And then I said, you know what? I like college football. And now I got 100 players I can do a deep dive on and research. And it's like I got lists and lists of players that I can't wait to watch film on and do. So I appreciate you having me on. If you, maybe what we do is a mid-season check in and check out some of these ranks.
See how talk about
exactly.
I think that's a great idea. We'll get towards the middle later in the season and we'll see if we can kind of reassess all this, especially for the 2022 class. And then on top of that, it's always good to kind of be looking forward as well. So anything else you want to tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, I know you can find me on Twitter at Devy Deep Dive, and you can DM me. And I don't have like a Patreon or anything. I just kind of do it through Venmo and PayPal. I don't like the monthly subscription thing, and just buy me a case of beer. I do I have another tagline. I do my best film work after a few beers. So that's all you need to do. Buy me a case of beer, and I'll give you 12 months of access to a great community. So I appreciate you having me on, Sonny. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, the Devy Reaper. Yeah, Brandon, I thought that was funny. That yes, Brandon is known for not being very kind. So if you're thinking that he's just gonna like tout all these players and you're gonna go and find out how much Brandon loves, it's the opposite. Brandon will not be easy on these players. He's gonna give you all their warts and wrinkles, and then you have to kind of decide which But it's rare that you find somebody that Brandon's glowing about. So I think that's a good sign though, because you're very diligent and you're not just a pushover. So I like
that's right. That's what I try and do. Yeah, I posted something because I'm doing John Mechie right now, and I posted on my Slack chat, hey guys, I'm a little concerned about John Mechie, and everyone's like, sell. Brandon hates him, and so I ended up putting all the film out that I'm going to watch out there and for discussion. So, but always a pleasure, Sonny.
Brandon, thank you much.
All right,
talk soon.